Hey guys, today what I wanted to talk about is I wanted to revisit the cost of living issue for just a few minutes. And I would encourage you to check out the two videos I've already made about this. I made a video on startup cost, and then I made a video on recurring expenses. And I think both of those are going to be very helpful and accurate. Because one thing I've mentioned before is when you talk about cost of living and what does it really take to live in the Philippines, you get answers that are all over the place. And so you'll hear guys talking about scraping by on $400 or $500 a month, or something in that neighborhood, and then you'll hear other people talking about needing $2,000 or $3,000 a month. And if you'll check out some of my other videos, I explain what my experiences were based on living there for 11 years. Now, what I wanted to talk about today is something I'm going to call hidden cost. And what I mean is, I can't think of another word to use for it. These are simply expenses that they're hidden in the sense that you may not think about them immediately when you're planning to move to the Philippines or live there. But in many cases, you'll encounter these, and so I've written these things down just to kind of make sure that I am keeping my thoughts on track here. But one thing you'll have to keep in mind is you're going to have to pay tax to the U.S. Now, when you are now this of course depends on a lot of factors. If you're retired and drawing Social Security, it's going to be different compared to if, let's say, you're my age, still working age. Now, one thing I will say is for American citizens, once you move to the Philippines and you've established residency there for, I believe it's 1 year, then up to a certain point you do not owe regular income tax, and it's pretty high. It's like $80,000, $90,000 or $100,000. I forgot what the current rate is, but if you make under that amount, let's just say for the sake of this video, it's under $90,000 a year, you don't pay income tax. But you do still have to pay your Social Security tax. So if you're self-employed, that's going to be a 15% cut right there into everything that you make, a little bit over 15% actually. So for me, for example, when I was there, I wasn't paying normal income tax, but I did have to pay my Social Security tax, and 15% can be a significant chunk out of the money that you're making. Okay, so another thing is security. And what I mean by this is I've already talked about this when I discussed rent. But there are going to be times in the Philippines when you as an expat simply you cannot maybe live exactly the same way that a Filipino would, because you being an expat, people are going to assume that you have money and or valuable items. This especially is going to impact your rent, which I've talked about before. You may need to find a place that has a little bit extra security, more security than a Filipino family would, because again, people are just going to assume that you have stuff in your house or apartment that is worth stealing. So you have to be a little more mindful of that than maybe a Filipino would. And this even goes into, there may be times when you're traveling somewhere and you have something valuable with you and you just decide, I'm going to take a taxi instead of a jeepney today because I just need that extra level of security. But the main way that the security issue plays out is in your choice of housing. And again, this depends on a lot of factors, depends on where you live and things like that, but it is something to consider. Another thing is visa fees. You are going to have to be sure that you keep up with either your tourist visa or pay the fees necessary to do if you're married to a Filipina and you want to do a permanent resident visa, there are still fees associated with applying for that. Same thing goes for the retirement visa, but those are fees that you're going to have to look out for and take care of And these are issues that a Filipino citizen obviously wouldn't have to deal with. Another one that this is something that I have mentioned before, but I'll mention it again. The exchange rate, depending on where you live, what your country of origin is. If you are, as an example, as an American, there are times when the exchange rate was really low, and other times it was really good. When I arrived in the Philippines in the early 2000s, the exchange rate was awesome. It reached almost 55 or 56 peso per dollar. Well, after the economy crashed and all the recession and all that stuff, it went down to about, it's been down to about 40 peso per dollar, or 40, 41. So if you think about it, that is a 20% reduction in your purchasing power. And that hurt me. That really hurt me to go from 50 plus down to 40 plus. That means that my rent when I was in Manila basically went from somewhere in the $400 neighborhood to the $500 neighborhood, all because of the exchange rate. A couple more that I'll mention. One is a budget to return to the United States. And I mentioned this a little bit in the first video I did about startup costs and emergency funds. But even if you don't have an emergency situation, there's just a good chance that over the course of your time in the Philippines, maybe not, but there's a good chance that you will want to return to the States just to visit family, just to take care of business. There can be a number of different reasons that you would want to go back home, at least for a little while. And again, that is something that you need to keep in mind, that you need to have a budget for. Now the final thing, get my caffeine here. The final hidden cost that I would mention is something I'll just call importing. Importing meaning there may be items that you can't find in the Philippines, and your only real option is to import them from the U.S. And again, this is one I think I've alluded to in other videos or mentioned. But one thing, for example, I take a supplement to control my cholesterol, and it's not available in the Philippines. So what I would have to do is order it and send it to the house here in the United States, and then ask my dad to send it to me in the Philippines. Another thing is, usually when I bought shoes, and this can kind of go back to needing to go back to the U.S., it's hard to find shoes that fit me in the Philippines because I wear a size 12 or sometimes a size 12 wide. So what I would do is bring shoes back with me when I went to the U.S. Now, if I was in the Philippines for extended periods of time, what I would have probably done is imported. I would have sent them to my dad and asked him to send those to me here. So anyway, those are just some things that I want you to think about, and I guess this could roughly fall under the category of emergency funds, some of it, but it goes back to what I've said in some of the previous videos about cost of living. It's always better to estimate a little bit on the high side and have some emergency funds, and obviously that doesn't go for the Philippines, that goes for anywhere. So those are just some things that I thought I would share regarding cost of living in the Philippines. If you have any questions about this, feel free to comment below. But before you ask a question, you may want to check out the other two videos that I've posted on this, and I'll link those within this video. So anyway, hope this helps.